One of the main things that I love about sword and sorcery and pulp fiction as a whole is that it inspires people to read who might not otherwise be interested in reading. A huge component of why I became a publisher is to create books that inspire people to read rather than to scroll or waste away their lives on Netflix. A while back, I had the opportunity to talk with Sean C.W. Korsgard, editor-in-chief of Battleborn Magazine, on the front lines of fantasy. They publish sword and sorcery and other types of fantasy, and their mission is to bring sword and sorcery and excellent fantasy to the average reader. They do this by printing new works of fiction from current authors. They also bring classics back to the modern reader who might not have ever read them before. There's a lot of sword and sorcery tales that have kind of just faded into obscurity because you just can't find them. They don't exist. The paperbacks went out of production and they've never come back since. But Battleborn has been bringing excellent tales of sword and sorcery that have been inaccessible for nigh on 40 years back into the hands of modern readers. Sean was also the acquisitions editor at Baen, who brought this little-known book to publication. And if you don't know, Howard Andrew Jones and Lord of a Shattered Land is probably one of the best works of modern sword and sorcery ever penned. If you Google essential works of sword and sorcery, the Google AI thing that they force you to use will mention Howard Andrew Jones in the same breath as all the other classic greats. We talk a lot about his experience working with Jones and bringing the Hanuvar Chronicles to print, his mentality publishing the new sword and sorcery and fantasy magazine, Battleborn. I had a great time talking with Sean, and I think all of you will learn a lot from him, because I know I did. Hi everyone, I'm James, an author, editor, and the owner of The Arcanist, an independent publisher dedicated to sharing excellent fantasy fiction. Now before we get into it, I wanted to let you know that in just a couple short weeks, Mordschlag Sword and Sorcery magazine, as well as the literary fantasy magazine, are coming to BackerKit. When you follow the campaign, you will get the literary fantasy magazine 2025 for free in its entirety, and you will get a free novelette from Mordschlag, a sword and sorcery story written in tandem by Lee Patton and myself. Now, these magazines are made with a love for the pulps. I modeled them after these old Alfred Hitchcock magazines. That size, I don't know, I've just never seen anything like it, and I wanted the exact size. They fit in your pocket. They have beautiful interior design, and for Mordschlag, we really stepped it up. Backers will have the choice between all 4 literary fantasy magazines, or the 2 Mordschlag Sword and Sorcery magazines, or you could just get them all. It will also be an opportunity to purchase every book that we have published, or any one of them you want, at a reduced rate. It is the Arcanist event of the year, so don't miss it. Without further ado, I'll pass it over to Sean.
Pleasure to be here, James. For those of you who don't know, my name is Sean C.W. Korsgard. I'm a U.S. Army veteran, award-winning photojournalist, author, editor, publicist, and publisher. Most relevantly to our interests is that I am the editor-in-chief of the newly launched Battleborn Magazine, whose first and second issue will be taking the front lines of fantasy by storm in the next month or two, and I can't wait to share with all of you just what we have in store.
For those of you who missed it, I did a review on Battleborn issue 1. I really liked what I saw, so somewhere in the cards here, you'll be able to see that interview and then come back here. Where can we find Battleborn before we begin?
Well, first off, you gave it a terrific review. I will be putting, reminds me of Savage Sword of Conan on our cover flaps somewhere, I promise. That was a watch his review. Please watch his review, because if I don't sell you the book, he will. So, the good news is, from conception to launch, it was very important to us that getting a copy of Battleborn, digital or physical, is very easy to do. So, the easiest place you can find it is the Big River website, Amazon, under Battleborn Magazine. Pre-orders for issue 1 are up as we speak. Perhaps they'll be live and direct to shipping by the time this posts. I don't know when the publication date will be. And the pre-orders for issue 2 shall be following forthwith. In addition, the Battleborn Magazine website should be going up in the next couple weeks. The Anvil map Magazine website, Iron Age Media's website, and we're going to be distributing to a number of bookstores, comic book shops, pretty much rolling out everywhere we can over the next couple of weeks. Once we have product, selling it is a little easier than promising product, as anyone who's had to hard knuckle their way through production can tell you. A lot of educational lessons in there coming from someone who was primarily from the editorial side before this. One other thing I do want to share with all of your listeners, because I don't know if we've made it official yet, we will also be available on Audible shortly. We're doing interviews for the audiobooks as we speak, so by year's end, the first 3 issues, all of year 1, will be available in audiobook format for your listening pleasure.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, great move. Hard thing for magazines to do, to get into audio.
It is, but it's a multimedia world, and at least I'm sure we'll come back to it. Working with Howard Andrew Jones, he was the editor-in-chief of Tales the Magician's Skull, the gold standard for modern sword and sorcery magazines, and I dare say modern fantasy magazines. But one of the 2 things that hurt it, one was distribution. You couldn't buy it on Amazon, ebooks were unavailable beyond the odd PDF, and there were no audiobooks or wider distribution. So there's just a lot of sales and money left on the table. And I'm not in the position where I can say no to anybody wanting to help me give more money to authors and put out more comics and magazines. So I'm going to put out everywhere I can, every which way I can, as often as I can.
We got to know the story. You started your career in the Army. How did you go from the Army into publishing and journalism?
So allow me to set the stage. I've wanted to be a writer since I was in the 3rd grade. Some kids don't know what they want to do. I knew from the moment my grandmother told me she wrote a book. She wrote a number of books about the Holocaust with a Shoah survivor, Ava Kor. And as an avid reader, that was like finding out magic exists, that books don't spring out of holes in the ground. They actually had to come from somewhere. And then the second step on that quest was, like a lot of other young boys and late 90s, early 2000s, Peter Jackson made The Lord of the Rings really, really cool. And my entire elementary school 4th and 5th grade classes burned through the fantasy canon in unison, marching our way from The Hobbit to Lord of the Rings, Orson Scott Card, Robert Jordan, Thomas Covenant. By the way, Thomas Covenant, marvelous series. Do not read it in the 5th grade. And then it comes back to my grandmother. I lived with her for most of my early high school years in Terre Haute, Indiana. I'm primarily from Virginia. And being someone who wanted to encourage me to read, she'd give me a $20 bill and tell me to ride my bike down to the local used bookstore. And as long as I spent half of it on books, I could blow the rest on comics, video games, various nerd memorabilia, and that was a real good deal for me. I'd come back with stacks of paperbacks. That's how I made my way through Michael Crichton, Peter Benchley, Clive Cussler, the classics of modern pulp, as well as just the classics, Hemingway, Twain, Dickens. But you never forget your first love, your first punch, and the first time you find what you want to do. And for me, that last one was a Conan paperback, the one that Carl Edward Wagner wrote the introduction for. Ken Kelly cover art, $1, a contender for the best dollar I've ever spent. And reading Robert E. Howard for the first time was like baptism by fire. I burned through it in an evening, and I went back down as soon as I could and bought every single paperback I could with a guy with a sword on the front of it. That people like me were why Clonans were a $1 million industry in fantasy for a generation. And while sometimes that didn't pay off, other times I discovered Michael Moorcock and Elric of Melniboné, Fritz Leiber and Fafhrd the Grey Mouser, John Jakes, Brack the Barbarian, working my way up and down what I'd later learned to be the beating heart and soul of sword and sorcery. I was in love with it before I knew there was a word for it. But I joined the Army, and I nearly died of pneumonia. I don't even get a cool I nearly died in the Army story. I nearly got William Henry Harrison. And Baen Books sent care packages to military hospitals, and I clung to the one they sent to me like a life raft. Read every book they sent, and it helped me rediscover modern science fiction and fantasy. I began reading analog science fiction. In fact, I'm proud to say I'm one of 8 people who've ever been one of their book review columnists. More people have walked on the moon. And prouder to say that after 2020, dear God, 2020, I'm proud of the work I did as a reporter. I did it because I liked writing the first draft of history, and I liked having a way to make a living writing. But so much crap happened in 2020, I knew I needed to find a new outlet. And that's where a friend of mine by the name of Christopher Rocchio was retiring at the ripe old age of 28 to become a full-time writer. Some Sun Eater series. I hear it's worked out for him. But he put my name into the folks at Baen, and they listened to him. And I'm forever grateful that they did. I got to learn from some of the best editors in the business. Tony Weisskopf, for those of you who don't know who runs Baen, tackles a manuscript the way surgeons handle surgery. Just as deft and as skilled, and you can learn more from some casual conversations than you can from entire college courses on the craft. I don't pretend to know everything, but I'm proud to say I learned a lot of it from my time working with Baen, and I'm sure we'll get to the rest shortly when we talk about Howard.
Yeah, so tell me a bit about your experience working with Howard Andrew Jones, because it was Battleborn issue 1 that really turned me on to Hanuvar as a character, and from what I understand, you are the acquisitions editor who acquired the Hanuvar books.
So, first, one of the highest compliments you can possibly give me is that you picked up Hanuvar because of Battleborn. God willing, you will not be the last, because it deserves to be held up as a classic of modern fantasy canon. And the story behind it is remarkable and illustrative of the ups and downs of publishing and writing careers. So Howard I'd taken one of his writing courses during the COVID lockdowns, and I'd just been hired by Baen and found out he'd be at the Worldcon in Washington, D.C. Now, I don't touch on publishing drama because I don't involve myself with publishing drama. But for those of you who do your research, you should know walking into Worldcon as an employee of Baen Books is like walking into Yankee Stadium wearing a Red Sox jersey. And I got to have a wonderful meeting with some of the folks who work at Analog. I got to meet a few other people, but primarily the joy of it was finally getting to meet Howard. And we talked and bonded. And he admitted that his current publisher, St. Andrew's Press, had decided not to pick up his new series. And as somebody who was reading Tales of the Magician's Skull with missionary-like fervor, that blew my mind. And he actually seemed very downcast by it, unsure of what his next step in the career was. And I remember, with apologies to my former boss, Tony, don't tell anyone at Worldcon you work for Baen. You know, I might know a guy who works for Baen. Do you think you could send them a manuscript? And Howard did, like 2 or 3 months later, and it actually came across my desk. Scared to death, because here I was, man's heart and soul in the manuscript, and anyone who's ever had to judge one knows that that's the hardest thing in the world. Having to be the one to tear someone's dreams to pieces if it's bad, and this was not bad. One of the things Tony taught me is the red line of death. That is the exact moment in a manuscript where you cannot be forced at the point of a bayonet to keep reading. My addendum is the Korsgaard green line of life. That is the exact moment a book sells you on it and you're there to the end of the line. And for The Lord of the Shattered Land by Howard Andrew Jones, that comes in the second story, towards the tail end. That little girl in his arms, having just been wounded, saving her brothers. And he's describing Valanis at the height of its glory, its women warriors, and she's astounded that women can be warriors, and his heart is breaking that she's dying in his arms. And she looks up at him and says, "Why are you crying? Warriors do not cry." And tears streaming Hanuvar's face. They do when a hero dies. She must have liked that. for she had a smile on her face as she passed. I'm tearing up describing it now, and I'm a macho, masculine soldier type. I don't cry easy, and the first time I read that line, I am sobbing at my desk, 'cause it hit me like... My coworker, Jason Cordova, actually had to shake me, 'cause he thought yeah, you okay, man? And I'm wiping tears, and I'm reading the best fantasy novel of the decade, man. Finished the rest of it by the end of the day, sent an full evaluation to Tony, describing every one of its positives, from its formatting, that it's like the old fix-up novels. It's classic Swords and Sorcery at its very best. It made me laugh, cheer, smile, sit on the edge of my desk and weep. And I would weep again if this was published without the Baen logo on the spine. And Tony, of course, being a good boss, me being the newbie, had to be like, okay, Korsgaard, I'm going to have to go over this, and I'll show you how to let down a manuscript easy, because this is the first time I'd ever sent a manuscript up to the boss. And it was, of course, had to be an educational example. And instead, an hour into the next morning, I get a call from my boss, and she's clearly having just read the line I did. So, I just finished the second story. Is it all this good? Yes, ma'am, it is. End of the day, I get another call from her. Okay, get me his agent's number. I need to make an offer. Well done. He was a Baen author by the end of the week.
Nice.
And I'm proud to say I got to be the one to call to tell him, and I will cherish his reaction to my dying day. And also that one of my jobs at Baen, because he was my first author I acquired, is that I had to walk him through a lot of the process of setting up the series, promoting it, doing the interviews, and he was my proof positive of how to better market authors than the way publishers do, and that I got to know not just Howard Andrew Jones, the author, but Howard Andrew Jones, the man. I got to go to Gen Con with him, and it's this massive convention, and the largest convention hall in North America, I believe.
Oh yeah, it's huge. It takes over like the entire downtown now.
And from one end of that hall to the other, he knew someone at every booth, their names, their hopes, their dreams, their families, and could talk to them with genuine love, affection, and support. That he never touched a drop of drink, but had such a zeal for life, could recite poetry, classic literature, book passages, and Medal of Honor citations from memory. Did the world's worst impression of the Beatles, called his wife every evening at 7, and as obviously in love with her as the day he met her. Proud father. He was a remarkable person. And during that same time period, I became a father, and he was an important role model for me on how to be a good father. Called me every day to ask, how's your boy? How you doing? And eventually my contract with Baen expired, and he could no longer dedicate the time he needed to Tales of the Magician's Skull because he was writing Hanuvar novels, but that was still one of his babies. He hated to let it go, and I was looking for a new project, and we got to talking about what Tales did right, what it did wrong, what markets were not being addressed within fantasy, within Sword and Sorcery, and we came upon this idea of a magazine that was very character-focused, action-heavy, mix of classical and new Sword and Sorcery. And Howard was the one who came up with the name, Battleborn. And we drew up so many plans for the first couple years, and then he died of brain cancer. I spoke at his funeral. And as anyone who will pick up an issue will tell you, from first to final, it was very important to me that his work and his impact be credited. He is the editor emeritus of Battleborn Magazine, and he always will be. Because I want that magazine to carry on his name and his spirit, now and for all the years to come.
I love the story. It really is an amazing story of publishing. I've learned a lot about Jones through talking with a lot of people lately, and all these different stories. I didn't know him, unfortunately. I came in a little bit too late for that, but just lacing in all these stories, kind of understanding retroactively, seeing the remnants of what was going on, and he really sounded like a wonderful person. I wish I had the opportunity to learn more from him.
I mean, that's the nice thing. You still can. There's a ton of wisdom in his books, his essays, and one of the other things I'm going to be proud to be doing in Battleborn, starting with the second issue, is Howard had this thesis, the 5 pillars of sword and sorcery. Character, action, environment, writing style, and world. And I'm going to be going each factor one by one over the next 5 issues to give his thesis and how he explained it to me and some of our authors on how to make not just good sword and sorcery, but great sword and sorcery. Because there was a ton of wisdom, and that deserves to be shared with the world.
So let's talk about your approach to sword and sorcery. There is a balance in Battleborn of new stuff and old stuff. Let's focus on that old stuff a little bit. I'm extremely curious. How do you go about getting so many classics reprinted in your books? Are you contacting the estates of some of these authors? What are the challenges there?
There are a ton of them. That's one of those other projects I've been working on since Howard was still alive, was this textbook explaining the history of sword and sorcery, covering the essential authors, why they're important. And the biggest challenge for that is 20 to 25 authors, only 2 of whom are living, meaning you're dealing with 23 separate author estates. A lot of personalities, a lot of conflicting goals, a lot of different desires, and hunting them down one by one is an enormous amount of legwork. That's one of the reasons why reprints are such a labor of love. But that does not mean that the labor is no less important. It is always going to be, someone can pick up a magazine or an anthology and you might think Robert E. Howard has been done to death, but for someone else it's their first time. Much less when it's David Drake, for example. Even within Sword and Sorcery, he's sort of been overshadowed in part because he's better known for his military science fiction, as he should be. Aside from Heinlein and Haldeman, he's maybe on the he's on the Mount Rushmore of that subgenre. But his fantasy is absolutely incredible, especially Sword and Sorcery, and the role he had preserving the works of Robert E. Howard, Manly Wade Wellman, Karl Edward Wagner, deserves to be remembered and saluted, to say nothing of his own work, which I'm proud to say in issue 2, we're reprinting a story of his, The Manticore, one of his Vedius and Dama. It's a Roman setting that's very military-focused, has not been reprinted since before I was born, 1988. And that was important with Battleborn, is that there is a ton of new talent, but that history, that sense of tradition, that we are standing upon the shoulders of giants, and that for a ton of readers, this is them discovering it for the first time. And there's no higher honor that, to me, few, that is, than that somebody could pick up my magazine and fall headfirst in love with some of the same classic stories I did. Like, I've been very open. My dream is that Battleborn is still being put out 10 years from now, and my son and his friends could pick up a copy from the store and, the same way I did, those old paperbacks, and fall in love with those authors and those works the same way I did. That torch gets passed for another generation, and I do a small part in keeping the fires lit. My son's a big reason I'm doing it, is that I know that there are entire generations that this is brand new to, that the authors we may think are essential, we have not done a good job proliferating them. Like, I was able to go to a used bookstore and find hundreds of paperbacks for $1. We don't even make paperbacks anymore. The cheap entryways to classic literature are being undone right before our very eyes. And that's a tragedy, because that is where a lot of people, especially young people, fall in love with the craft of reading, with literature. And I want to do my part to keep that going.
I really admire what you're saying about keeping your son in mind with this. For me, a big part of publishing is trying to establish something for my family, right? When my mom actually passed away of brain cancer as well a few years ago, and one of the things that she told me was she was a therapist, and she ran her own therapy practice, and her biggest regret was that died with her. She couldn't just, give me the therapy license, right? She would have liked to have had something to give to her family so that we can keep trying to, make a living for ourselves. And with the Arcanist being a book publisher in this world, I'm working very hard trying to make it a viable financial avenue for my family. Where actually my wife is about to start doing marketing for us, which is super exciting. And we'll be able to hand that down to the kids, and hopefully a love of reading excellent fantasy. So I really love your avenue there.
And I love your efforts in it too. One team, one fight. We're all in this together.
Absolutely. A lot of publishers seem to, bigger publishers fail to realize that their competition is Netflix and not other publishers.
The fallacy so many publishers and even writers fall into is they think if you're buying one book, you're not buying another, specifically theirs. And to a certain extent, I get that. I think part of that is I come from journalism, which is essentially one giant sinking ship where everybody's playing the fiddle and pretending it's not going down. Thankfully, publishing has not yet reached that point. I fear that my fear is that, like the American comic book industry, we will chase the whales at the expense of the next generation. American comic books, what did them in is they kept going after whatever gave them headlines and the divorced dentists who've been buying comic books for 40 years, while neglecting children, the number one buyer of comics for the first 80 years of the industry. And now they're surprised when comics that 20 years ago sold 100,000 copies and 10 years ago sold 50,000 copies can't sell 10,000 copies today. I fear that's going to be what happens with publishing because, especially sci-fi fantasy, there has been a rush to appeal to, I call it the triple threat. You've had, in succession, Harry Potter, Hunger Games, Twilight, and 50 Shades. And they've created what is the ideal YA market, an unmarried 32-year-old female who buys every romantasy or YA novel she can. The issue is that is a much smaller market than trying to appeal to everybody or other particular markets. I mean, forget men for a second. We aren't publishing books for young boys or young girls. Even our children's books are aimed for edgy millennials who don't have children. And putting aside any other implications, I'm a businessman. I see a market that is not being served. That is an opportunity. And I remember the kind of things that made me fall in love with literature, what made me stick with the arts. And my fear is not one publisher or another triumphing. It is walking into a bookstore as the last of the sci-fi fantasy section gets dumped into the clearance bin to make room for Funko Pops and manga. And that should be the fear of everyone else in publishing, too. We need to get the people who have given up on the medium back into reading by any means necessary. Because every time we have a new reader, that is a victory for all of us. Anytime somebody walks away from literature entirely, putting aside the fact that that is a tragic victory for ignorance and illiteracy, we lose a customer. And we cannot afford to.
This is one of those rare instances where the business angle is the same as the humanitarian one, where we want people to read, not only because it's financially good for the business entities, but because, it's just better for the world to have literate, knowledgeable, thoughtful people. It's almost... I very much look at it as a battle of against scrolling. They're talking about the market for stories for young boys. Now it is pretty much accepted that teenage boys are going to be playing video games. They're going to be on YouTube. They're not going to be reading books.
I think of the kind of books I read as a young boy, and in the past 15 years, publishing has done a damned awful job putting out anything that would have appealed to someone like me. And mind you, I was a bit more flexible than a lot of kids my age. Someone like my brother, we have lost more young readers to The Great Gatsby than we did to both World Wars. We do everything we can with our education system to make people hate reading, to think of it as a chore rather than a pleasure. And it takes a hell of a lot to get them back in. And luckily, I've managed to use my brother as a guinea pig, along with a few other veterans I'm friends with. Test what gets them to pick up books again and where they go. Like, my kid brother went from barely being able to finish a Larry Correa novel to reading Marcus Aurelius.
Oh,
I know, for fun. That is not just a victory, that's the damned war. And if we can apply that at large, there is such a large amount of people that it's a business opportunity, but like you said, it's also a moral one. And I look forward to waging it every step I can. I'm at RavenCon recently, big sci-fi fantasy convention here in Virginia. There was a panel I was on about AI and literature, and people were despondent. Like, the battle has already been lost. We're going to lose it. We're 10 years out from brain rot and AI replacing everyone in the room, and I won't hear it. Not just because there's a little boy in the next room who picks up books the same way every child picks up a book, like they're holding treasure in their hands. And I will fight for that tooth and nail to my dying breath, but also because the battle is not lost. It is worth being fought. And I published Sword and Sorcery, for crying out loud, a genre that, by traditional publishing's wisdom, died in 1990 and never came back. Better men than me, Howard, James Enge, so many authors fought tooth and nail to keep this genre not only alive but growing. And all I've got to do is talk about it with passion to people that maybe they pick up a book. I was in the military. I have fought harder battles than this, I promise you. And just because the battle's hard does not mean it is hopeless. And I will proudly go down swinging if that is what is required, but I don't think it is a hopeless battle. And I cherish every chance we have to keep fighting it.
it's a really exciting time getting into Sword and Sorcery as an adult. I had always been aware of it. I was a very avid D&D player all the way from like childhood into early adulthood, and so obviously the Appendix N was always in the back of my mind, but it really started during my creative writing education. I had a professor who actually blurbed my first book, which was really cool, but while I was writing that first book, he had reminded me of Robert E. Howard and Conan. So I read The Phoenix on the Sword, The God in the Bowl. Those were my first two exposures into proper Howard prose. And those were so... I mean, it unlocked a world to me. And then Lee Patton, who you published.
Proudly so. He is remarkable.
Oh, man. For a second, I gotta just, like, brag about this guy.
No. Flowers. Because he and Israk the Deathless, I hope Battleborn put eyeballs on them both.
Oh, yeah. It's so cool to see people loving Israk, because I knew I had fire in my hands when we were publishing that, and we figured it out as we went. But Lee Patton and I went to school together, and we established the Literary Fantasy Magazine. He's our managing editor. He's a co-founder, and he had always been kind of whispering the Sword and Sorcery into my ear, and I very slowly came around to it, because I was all the way on this like crusade of I want fantasy to be more highbrow and literary, and I wanted literary fiction but in a secondary world. Is kind of what I was after at first. I still do that to an extent, but I've pared it way back, because pulp fiction, I mean, my whole thing is I want to meet people halfway. I want to get people reading again. What pulp fiction is really good at doing is meeting your average person who's not a literature major, who's not already invested in the trenches of tough to read things, and it gives them something meaty to chew on. And that's what I love about pulp now, but what actually drew me in was how articulate, Howard is. I mean, his prose is beautiful. It is, in many ways, completely on the literary side of things, rather than what people would like to say Pulp Fiction is about. With its simplicity and plot and language, that's just not the case. So this is all to say, it is so cool to see this genre having a revitalization in the last few years.
One of the greatest tricks the devil ever pulled was convincing people that pulp could not also be literary. And it's not even just Robert E. Howard. I mean, think of the golden age of the pulps. You had the detective thrillers that became the foundations of noir, the westerns that became the backbones of that entire print movement, the early comic books, to say nothing of everything from the men's adventure magazines to the earliest days of science fiction. Sword and sorcery got its start in the fires of the pulps. People use pulp like a slur, and it shouldn't be. Dickens was pulp. Shakespeare wrote for the plebs. The oldest work of the English language is a story about a guy who kills a monster, the monster's mom, and a dragon trying to earn a kinship. There is nothing wrong with being pulpy. Pulp and heroism are the kind of things that stick in your mind and make you march that extra mile, face down that foe, save a friend, do the impossible. And there is beauty in that. And especially in authors like Howard. Sword and Sorcery does have that spectrum. You have the more raw, bare-bones authors. But you also have on the other end authors like Michael Shea, who have this dense literary prose that is no less in spirit with Sword and Sorcery than Howard or Moorcock. It is a much more flexible genre than many people give it credit for, and that's at least one of the great works of so many of the people who've been writing in it for the past 20 years, from Mike Stackpole to Howard Andrew Jones, is the fact there is great depth within it. It is a more flexible genre than the bad Clonans or the Beastmaster movies you watched growing up. And part of the other is that there is an opportunity. I'm not going to yuck in people's yum for all the people who do like romantasy, but for all the markets of people who want to have sex with monsters, there is just as much of a market for people who want to stab them. And I won't name names, but epic fantasy has commercially flopped because there are some authors who will never finish their book series.
Oh, we've named those authors on this channel.
My mother raised a gentleman. I don't kiss and tell, but more importantly, I don't have to. We know who you are. But
we've been burned too many times.
The crown of action-oriented fantasy is lying in the gutter. Who better to pick it up with their sword than a genre of self-made kings, roguish thieves, fallen emperors, and everything in between? Sword and Sorcery has survived for a century, despite the best efforts of many to kill it, and it will continue to survive. And I'm damn proud to say there is a generation of up-and-coming authors that I think will do the classics proud.
So let's talk about that generation. When you're getting submissions for Battleborn, what are the elements that you're looking for that are going to stand out among the slush?
So first, don't use AI and don't plagiarize. We are very happy to say at over 800 submissions, we only received 5 that used AI, and one person who, I kid you not, thought they could submit the Tower of the Elephant under their own name without even changing the name of Conan. That is the most famous Sword and Sorcery story of all time. What do you take me for? That is not just an insult to... That is an insult to me, my magazine, and yourself. You should try to plagiarize better stories. We'll still reject you, but try harder than that. So, get the basics
right. Was it just word for word, or was it like a poor rewrite?
Different title, different name, same story, word for word. Like they just pulled it from Project Gutenberg.
Oh my goodness.
What so many people forget about slush piles is that you are not You're not competing with all 800. You're competing with maybe the top 100 because those other 800 don't follow the instructions. Those instructions are for your benefit. Okay, you have submitted your spicy werewolf erotica to our slush pile. Not our genre. Rejected. You forgot to attach the story. Rejected. That's one of the things reading slush piles you learn is that most of them are pretty easy rejections. If you do the bare minimum, you're already ahead of about half your competition. So start there. Continue to read the genre, both classic and modern. My advice to anyone who wants to submit to Battleborn, you start with 3. Read a Conan story by Robert E. Howard, an Elric story by Michael Moorcock, and any of the Hanuvar stories by Howard Andrew Jones. There are better teachers than any classroom and a foundation that will lead you in the genre for the rest of your life. Continue reading the classics, especially because some of our newer authors in the genre, you definitely see the influence of, say, Clark Atkinson Smith in Lee Patton's work or Alyssa Hazel's, that sort of verbiage and literary flourish that Smith made so famous. And you pick up tricks and tools along the way. But the Battleborn signature especially, we are character-focused and action-heavy. So make sure you have a memorable character with a few details that stand out and some really good, hard-knuckle, authentic action. One of the best tips I can give for people for writing action: watch a Shaw Brothers movie, the way they stage their action scenes. Or a play, the way they stage movement and everything. Make sure that your movement feels authentic, real, that you have a good sense of the space. That you don't just pull a sword literally out of your protagonist's ass. Because they cannot hide that in their loincloths anywhere else. Have that authentic, genuine character and action, and you are already in the top 2%. And from there, anyone who's received a non-form rejection from Battleborn can and will tell you, I am generous with my critiques. I read every cover letter that gets sent in, because if I don't have the heart to tell you no yet, then I shouldn't be telling you no. And because I want you to understand where you fell short, because I want you to try again. I've been the author submitting to slush piles before. I know how much it sucks to get that rejection and not know why. So I try to give you a little bit more to tell you how to do better so that you can come back and next time you triumph. And that's the other reason why our slush pile, I'm proud to say, is blind. I actually rejected a story from a New York Times best-selling author who I'm good friends with. And even there, we were like, okay, good, you were telling the truth. You didn't just accept it because we're friends. Good, that was not my A game. I'm trying harder next year. I want you to know that if you get a story rejected or accepted, it was by merit and no other reason. That if you get an acceptance letter from Battleborn, you wrote something that touched me in my heart and my soul that I can't wait to share with the world. And I can say that for every single story in these first 3 issues. We've got a murderer's row of damn fine authors, 100,000 words per issue of fiction. We shot well past our 70,000 goal just because the quality was there. And the range and level of talent is astounding. And that's, like you said, talking about Lee, the best part working in publishing is getting to find that raw beauty and talent and share it with the world. I'm proud to be here, hope to be back again. And for all of your viewers and listeners, I want Battleborn, not just even within Sword and Sorcery, but within fantasy fandom to be something special. The kind of thing that, like that first time you read Robert E. Howard or Howard Andrew Jones, makes you sit on the edge of your seat, your heart pounding like a kettle drum, your blood pumping in your veins, that thrill, that chill, that magic you feel the first time you fall in love with a book. I want you to have at least one story, if not more, in every issue of the magazine that makes you feel that. And if I've done that, mission accomplished. And I promise we're just getting started.
If issue one's any indication, I think we're in for a hell of a ride. There almost every single fiction piece in that issue just completely blew me away.
It's more than a magazine. It's a mission statement. From the front lines of the fantasy to your hands. We're bringing the action, we're bringing the heroes. Just come ready for glory and you'll come home covered in it, guys. Believe it.
I dig it. Well, Shaun, just in case people missed, can you let us know where we can find you, where we can find Battleborn, and any other pertinent information that new writers might need to know with the next year coming?
So, first, buy the magazine. The more people who buy the magazine, the bigger our budgets are for next year and the less we have to crowdfund. Which means we can buy more stories from people like you. And believe me, we want to. Likewise, for any artists, we are looking for black and white artists all the time because we want that within Sword and Sorcery. You don't get the next Rosetta without using human artwork. A robot will never make me want to paint something on the side of a panel van, believe me. Or to own a panel van. The only reason to own one is to paint fantasy figures on it. Look, support the magazine, tell your friends, read the classics, hone your craft. We're available on Amazon and everywhere fine books are sold. And please, don't be afraid to reach out to us on social media. Battleborn is active on Facebook and Twitter or whatever they're calling it. I'm on every relevant social media under my own name. And I try to engage with people and answer questions as best I can. Because we're on this fight together. Let's enjoy it.